I wiped the steam from the bathroom mirror, expecting to see my own tired face staring back. Instead, I saw something else. At first, everything seemed normal, until I blinked. My reflection didn't. I stood frozen, breath caught in my throat, watching as the other me tilted his head slightly, his mouth twitching into something that almost looked like a smile. A slow, deliberate movement I hadn't made. My chest tightened. This wasn't a trick of the light. I lifted my hand, and it lifted half a second too late. Then, it spoke. But my lips never moved. Now let me tell you the story from the beginning. Part 1, The Cure That Saved Me. Hey, everyone. I don't know how to start this, so I'll just say it, I think something is wrong with me. No, scratch that. I know something is wrong with me. And I don't think I have much time before I find out exactly what. I should probably explain. My name is Dr. James Mercer. I was, a biomedical researcher specializing in nanotechnology. For the past decade, I've dedicated my life to pushing the boundaries of regenerative medicine, trying to find ways to repair damaged organs, regrow tissue, and, hopefully, extend human life. But life has a funny sense of irony, doesn't it? Because 5 months ago, while I was trying to unlock the secrets of saving life, I found out I was dying. A rare genetic disorder. One that had been dormant in my system for years before it suddenly decided to activate, eating me alive from the inside. My doctors gave me 3 months, maybe 4 before my nervous system would start to shut down. There was no cure. No treatment. Just the slow, inevitable countdown to the end. I refused to accept it. My research team had been working on a radical new treatment, one that used nanites, microscopic machines programmed to repair cells on a molecular level. We were nowhere near human trials. There were too many unknowns, too many risks. But risks didn't matter when you were already dead. I volunteered myself as patient zero. The procedure itself was simple. A direct injection of billions of nanites into my bloodstream, their sole directive to seek out and repair damaged cells. They were designed to be self-sustaining, constantly updating, learning, adapting to my body. A living system inside me, one that would rebuild me from the inside out. I won't lie, I was terrified. The night before the procedure, I sat in my office staring at a framed picture of myself at my graduation ceremony, wondering if that was the last version of me that would ever exist. The day of the operation, I was wheeled into the lab like a condemned man heading to the gallows. I remember the cold sting of the needle, the metallic taste in my mouth, the way my body burned as the nanites flooded my system. And then, darkness. When I woke up, I felt alive. More alive than I had in years. The weakness, the tremors, the constant pain in my joints, gone. My body felt stronger, like I had been rewired from the inside out. My vision was sharper, my reflexes faster. I had never felt better. My colleagues ran test after test, and every single result was the same, I was completely cured. It was a miracle. The cure of the century. And for a few blissful weeks, I let myself believe it. But then, the little things started happening. The first time, it was small. I reached for my coffee mug one morning, and when I grabbed it, my hand didn't feel like my own. The skin was too smooth, too perfect. For a second, it almost felt foreign. I dismissed it, shaking it off as paranoia. After all, my body had gone through a massive transformation, it made sense to feel a little off, right? Then came the dreams. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, with fragmented images in my mind. A room that didn't exist, filled with pulsating blue light. The feeling of something watching me. The sensation of being inside something vast, like I wasn't just dreaming, I was remembering. Still, I ignored it. Then, 2 nights ago, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed something weird. My reflection, it was delayed. Not by much, just a fraction of a second, but enough to make my stomach drop. I waved my hand in front of the mirror, and for the briefest moment, it didn't move at the same time as me. I barely slept that night. And now, I'm sitting here, typing this, knowing in my gut that something is wrong. I keep thinking about that first injection, how it rewired my cells, rebuilt me. What if it didn't just fix me? What if it changed me? I don't know what's happening to me. But I'm going to find out. And if I don't post again soon, just know that James Mercer didn't survive that operation. Something else did. Part 2, The First Signs. The first real proof that something was wrong happened at work. I was going through some old patient records when I accidentally knocked my coffee off the desk. Instinctively, I reached out to grab it, and my hand moved faster than it should have. I didn't just catch the mug, I snatched it mid-fall with precision that felt unnatural. My mind barely had time to process what was happening before my body reacted. My heart pounded as I sat there, staring at my own fingers wrapped around the handle. It wasn't just fast, it was precise. Too precise. Almost like my body had reacted before my brain even realized the mug was falling. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered, like something inside me had anticipated the movement, like my body wasn't entirely mine anymore. Then, there were the memory lapses. At first, it was small things, forgetting why I walked into a room, losing track of what I was saying mid-sentence. But then I started remembering things I had never experienced. Flashes of places I've never been, voices I didn't recognize whispering in my head. I could recall conversations in languages I'd never spoken, visualize mechanical blueprints of devices that had never existed. It was as if my mind was merging with something else, something older, something inhuman. I checked my work log one evening, only to find notes I had no memory of writing, entire paragraphs in perfectly formatted code, detailing complex calculations I had never studied. The words looked familiar, but not mine. It wasn't until I cut myself that I truly panicked. I had been slicing an apple when the knife slipped, carving a deep gash across my palm. I braced for the pain, the sting of torn flesh, the bloom of red pooling in my hand. But there was nothing. No pain. No blood. I watched in horror as the wound closed itself in seconds, the skin knitting back together as if it had never been cut at all. The edges of my flesh shifted like liquid metal, sealing shut with an almost surgical precision. I ran to the bathroom, staring at my trembling hands under the fluorescent lights. My skin looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. It felt synthetic. That night, I locked myself in my apartment, tearing through my medical records, old photos, anything that could prove I was still me. But the deeper I searched, the more things didn't add up. My fingerprints no longer matched old records. My handwriting, subtly, almost imperceptibly, had changed. And when I finally worked up the nerve to take a DNA test, I nearly dropped the results in horror. The test didn't recognize me as fully human anymore. There were sequences in my genetic code that shouldn't exist, strands of something not from this world. The procedure didn't just heal me. It rebuilt me into something else. And whatever that something was, it was still changing. Part 3, My Skin Isn't Mine. I barely slept after seeing my DNA test results. My body had been altered on a fundamental level, and I didn't even know how much. Every time I looked at my hands, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease, like they belonged to someone else. I kept rubbing my palms together, pressing my fingers into my skin, trying to feel normal. But something wasn't right. My skin wasn't just smooth, it was too smooth, too uniform. The fine imperfections, the barely noticeable scars from childhood injuries, gone. It was as if someone had copied the idea of human skin but missed the microscopic details that made it real. The more I stared, the worse it got. And then, in the dim light of my bathroom, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A small patch of skin near my wrist was peeling. At first, I thought it was dry skin, maybe a reaction to stress. But as I pulled at the flaking piece, a section of flesh slid away like a loose film, revealing what was underneath. My breath caught in my throat. The exposed area wasn't raw muscle or blood. Instead, it was dark, metallic, shifting. It wasn't solid like metal, nor was it liquid, it was something in between, moving in slow, deliberate patterns beneath the surface. I jerked my hand back, my vision swimming with panic. The skin I had peeled away grew back within seconds, sealing itself seamlessly, as if it had never been disturbed at all. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. My hands were shaking. My own body was self-repairing, but it wasn't using flesh. It was using something else. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. That this was some hallucination caused by stress, by paranoia, by lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew the truth. The nanotech inside me, it wasn't just repairing damage. It was replacing me. Piece by piece. And I had no idea how much of me was still left. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app, running my gaze over my face, my neck, my arms, searching for any other abnormalities. At first, I looked the same. But when I adjusted the brightness on the screen, a subtle glow pulsed beneath my skin. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I touched my forearm, pressing my fingers down hard, and for a fraction of a second, my skin rippled under my touch, like something was shifting beneath the surface. That's when I remembered the surveillance footage from my lab. The footage of the other test subjects. If I was changing, if my body was being rewritten, then it had happened to them too. I rushed to my laptop, pulling up the restricted access files I had downloaded the night before. There were videos. Dozens of them, labeled with names I didn't recognize. Each file contained footage of past patients who had undergone the procedure. My stomach clenched as I pressed play on the first one. The video showed a man sitting in a lab chair, just like I had been during my operation. At first, he looked normal. But then, the changes began. His skin started shifting, moving in ways human flesh shouldn't. His features became too symmetrical, too perfect. And then, his body convulsed, his muscles twisting unnaturally as his entire form morphed into something inhuman. Before the video cut out, I saw his eyes go completely black. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. The changes in me had already begun, but the process wasn't over yet. My skin, my cells, my entire being, it was all in flux. And if the pattern in those videos was any indication, I wouldn't stay human for much longer. Part 4, The Ones Before Me. I didn't go to work the next day. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed locked in my apartment, replaying the videos over and over, searching for something, anything, that might tell me what was happening to me. Each file was worse than the last. At first, the test subjects all seemed normal, just like I had after the procedure. Then, the changes began. Skin turning too smooth, eyes becoming too reflective, movements that were too precise, too unnatural, like their bodies were learning how to mimic human behavior rather than simply existing as part of it. And then, the final stage, complete transformation. Their bodies didn't just change, they adapted, reshaping into something fluid, something evolving. The last frames of each video showed only empty chairs, restraints undone. No bodies. No remains. It was as if they had simply walked away. I searched the lab's database for their names. There had to be records, something that explained where they had gone. But every trace of them had been erased. No medical records. No employment history. No evidence that they had ever existed at all. I found a folder labeled Project Rebirth, Phase 1, buried in the system under a layer of encryption. When I finally cracked it open, my blood ran cold. There were photos, surveillance stills taken in public places. Busy streets. Shopping malls. Airports. Each image had one person circled, someone I now recognized as a former test subject. They were still out there. Living among people, blending in. And no one seemed to notice that they weren't human anymore. A new, paralyzing fear settled over me. I wasn't alone. If they were out there, if they had left the lab and disappeared into society, how many of them were walking among us? How many had completed the transformation? And worse, what were they waiting for? A cold sweat broke across my skin as I scrolled further, landing on the final file in the database. My throat tightened when I read the label, Project Rebirth, Phase 2, Activation Protocol. My shaking hands clicked the file open, revealing a countdown. A date. My mind raced, trying to process what it meant. That date was only 3 days away. Part 5, I Am Not Alone. I barely had time to process the implications of what I'd found before something changed, not in the files, not in the data, but in me. It was subtle at first, a strange awareness creeping over my senses, as if I could feel the room in ways I never had before. The air was too still. The hum of my laptop's fan was suddenly too loud, every sound hyper-detailed, almost translated into something deeper. Then came the realization that turned my stomach to ice. I wasn't alone. There was someone outside my apartment. I didn't hear footsteps, I didn't see movement, but I felt them. A presence. A shape standing in the hallway, watching my door. I moved slowly, barely breathing, and checked the peephole. The corridor was empty. But the feeling remained. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't exhaustion. Something was there, and I had the sickening sense that it was waiting for me to make a move. My pulse hammered in my ears. I backed away, shutting off my laptop, moving carefully to avoid making noise. My skin prickled as I felt something shift in my own body, like a second set of instincts I hadn't known existed were now waking up, alerting me to danger. My muscles tensed, coiled, preparing for something. A part of me wanted to run. But another part, the one that wasn't entirely mine anymore, wanted to confront it. I didn't. I forced myself to stay inside, to wait. Minutes passed. An hour. The presence didn't leave. It didn't knock. It didn't move. It just existed on the other side of my door, pressing into the edges of my awareness. When I finally worked up the nerve to crack the door open, the hallway was still empty. But I knew, someone had been there. Someone like me. The thought sent a cold shiver through my body. Were they watching me because I was one of them now? Or because I hadn't fully changed yet? I needed answers. I couldn't stay here, waiting for whatever was coming. If the transformation was still happening, if my body was still shifting into something else, I had to find out what I was turning into, and if there was any way to stop it. My mind went back to the files I had seen. The images of other test subjects, blending into the world unnoticed. If they had completed the process, they had to be out there. Hiding in plain sight. And I was going to find one. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and walked out of my apartment, locking the door behind me. The moment I stepped into the night, that feeling of being watched intensified. I didn't look back. I just started walking, heading toward the one place I knew might hold the truth, the last known location of a test subject who had vanished, one of the first to complete the transformation. If anyone knew what was happening to me, it would be them. And I just hoped I wasn't too late. Part 6, My Mind is Not My Own. The streets felt different. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like my perception had expanded. As I walked through the city, I could sense things I shouldn't have been able to. The weight of moving bodies pressing against the sidewalk, the faint hum of traffic from blocks away, the static charge in the air from a neon sign flickering in a shop window. It wasn't just heightened awareness, it was calculated. My brain was analyzing, measuring, mapping everything around me in real time. And worse? I wasn't doing it consciously. My body, my mind, had started thinking in ways that weren't human. I tried to push it down, focus on the task at hand. I had spent the last few hours tracking one of the missing test subjects, using the digital footprints they had left behind before disappearing off the grid. A name, Daniel Cole. A former engineer, a researcher like me, who had undergone the same procedure 2 years ago. His bank records showed nothing after his final withdrawal. His apartment had been abandoned. No social media activity. No missing person reports. As if he had simply been erased. But I had found one clue, security footage from an underground parking garage, dated a month ago. The footage showed him standing motionless near a stairwell, staring at the camera. He didn't move. Didn't blink. And then, after exactly 3 minutes, he vanished. Not walked away, vanished. The garage was my only lead. It was nearly empty when I arrived, the flickering overhead lights casting long, distorted shadows against the concrete. Every step echoed in the silence, making me hyper-aware of how exposed I was. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it again, that strange, creeping presence in my mind, as if something was watching from inside my own head. I shook it off and kept moving, scanning every darkened corner, every parked car. And then, I saw him. Daniel. Standing at the far end of the garage, half hidden in the shadows. He was still, unnaturally so, his body rigid, frozen in place. His head was slightly tilted, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Daniel, I called, keeping my voice steady. No reaction. I took a cautious step forward. He moved. Not like a normal person, there was no shifting weight, no hesitation. 1 second he was standing completely still, the next, his head snapped up and he was looking directly at me. His eyes, God, his eyes. They weren't human anymore. They were too reflective, like polished glass, catching the dim light in a way that made my stomach twist. And then he spoke. You're awake. His voice was calm, devoid of emotion. A statement, not a question. Something clicked inside me. A sudden rush of static, a pulse in my skull that wasn't pain but something worse, an intrusion. A foreign thought, something not mine, whispering just beneath my consciousness. You're one of us now. My breath caught. I took a step back, shaking my head. No. No, I'm not like you. Daniel just tilted his head further, his mouth twitching into something that might have been a smile. Not yet. His voice was inside my head now, not just in my ears. My skin burned, every nerve in my body screaming as something inside me responded, as if waking up to a signal I hadn't known I was waiting for. I turned and ran. I didn't wait for his next words, didn't stop to see if he followed. My body was faster than it should have been, my legs propelling me forward with unnatural precision. But the worst part? I knew he wasn't chasing me. He didn't need to. Because whatever had happened to him, whatever had made him like that, it was already happening to me. And I was running from myself. Part 7, The Hidden Message. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Every instinct told me that home wasn't safe anymore. Not because someone would be waiting for me, but because I would be waiting for me. My body, my mind, whatever was happening to me, wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. I could feel it now, deeper than before, a low humming inside my skull, like an unread message waiting to be opened. The moment I stopped moving, I knew it would unfold. I needed to get ahead of it. I needed to find out what was waiting for me at the coordinates. The address was a derelict office building on the outskirts of the city, abandoned for years, condemned after a fire gutted the top floors. The entrance was easy enough to break into, too easy. It felt like I was meant to be there, like something had been guiding me to this place long before I even knew it existed. My footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, dust swirling in the beams of my flashlight. The silence was too heavy, pressing against me like the walls themselves were breathing. And then, in the dim light, I saw the door. Unmarked. Metal. Sealed shut with an electronic lock. But the second I placed my hand against it, the lock clicked open. Inside, the air was different. Colder. Humming with a kind of energy I couldn't describe. The room wasn't large, just a sterile, windowless space lined with filing cabinets and a single, flickering computer monitor. The moment I stepped inside, the monitor came to life. Green text scrolled across the screen, filling the dark space with an eerie glow. It knew me. Subject, James Mercer. Status, transition incomplete. Awaiting finalization. Proceed to designated site. My mouth went dry. This wasn't just about the experiment. This was a process. A conversion. A replacement. The finalization meant becoming something else entirely. And if I didn't stop it, I wouldn't just lose control, I would cease to exist. I searched the room frantically, rifling through the cabinets, pulling out stacks of documents. Project Rebirth wasn't about healing. It wasn't about improving. It was about infiltration. My body wasn't being repaired. It was being rewritten. And then, the worst discovery of all, I wasn't the only one. Another file listed hundreds of names, each marked with a phase status. Most were labeled complete. My hands shook as I scrolled down, my heart hammering against my ribs. These weren't just test subjects. They were out there. Already blended into society. Already waiting. My eyes landed on one final entry. A new subject. The name on the screen made me feel like I was drowning. Next target, Lucas Mercer. Relation, brother. Status, awaiting procedure. I staggered back, the weight of it crushing me. My little brother, they were going after him next. This wasn't just about me anymore. Whatever was happening, whatever I was becoming, I was the only one who could stop it. And I didn't have time to be afraid. I had to move. Part 8, The Awakening. I ran. I didn't care about covering my tracks, about who might be watching, I just knew I had to get to Lucas before they did. My mind was a mess of static and panic, my thoughts no longer entirely my own. Awaiting finalization. The words from the monitor pulsed in my head like a heartbeat, like a countdown. I could feel it happening, feel the change crawling under my skin, like something waking up inside me, stretching, unfolding, waiting. But I wasn't going to let it take me. Not yet. Lucas lived on the other side of town, a quiet apartment above a bookstore where he worked part-time while finishing his degree. He had no idea what was coming. No idea that his brother wasn't entirely his brother anymore. My hands trembled against the steering wheel as I drove, gripping it so hard I thought the bones might snap. But the worst part? I wasn't sure if I was trying to protect him, or deliver him. By the time I reached his place, it was already too late. The front door was ajar, the lock broken. A cold, sinking dread settled into my gut as I stepped inside. The apartment was empty. No struggle, no signs of a fight, just an eerie, unnatural stillness, like he had simply ceased to exist. The only thing left was a single sheet of paper, placed neatly on the kitchen table. My handwriting. But I hadn't written it. My chest tightened as I forced myself to read. James, stop running. You know what comes next. He is safe. For now. But you need to finish the process. Come home. Home. I knew what it meant. Not my apartment, not the lab. The site. The last phase. I didn't know how I knew, I just did. It was pulling me in now, a gravity I couldn't fight, a tether buried deep in whatever I had become. Lucas was alive, but that wouldn't last. Not unless I ended this. My pulse roared in my ears as I turned and walked out, knowing where I had to go. Back to where it all started. The drive to the facility felt like moving through a dream. My body felt lighter, like it wasn't entirely solid anymore, like the last parts of me were slipping away. The stars above seemed brighter, the world sharper. I wasn't human anymore. Not fully. Maybe not at all. But I had one last choice to make. And I was going to make it while I still had the will to decide. The moment I stepped inside the facility, the doors locked behind me. The lights flickered on. And then, the voice, my own voice. Welcome back, James. It's time. Part 9, The Truth of What We Are. The voice echoed through the facility, and my stomach twisted with something deeper than fear, recognition. It wasn't just my voice. It was me. Something else inside this place, something that knew me, understood me, was waiting for me. The lights flickered as I moved forward, my own footsteps unnervingly silent, like my body was beginning to reject even the sound of my existence. The hallways were too clean, too precise, sterile, like a place that had never truly been lived in. I wasn't walking through a building. I was walking through a system. A living, breathing machine that had been built with one purpose, to create something new. I entered a large, circular chamber at the heart of the facility. Screens lined the walls, each flickering with different versions of me. James Mercer, standing in a lab coat, discussing the procedure. James Mercer, sitting in his office, reading over data. James Mercer, strapped to a table, staring blankly at the ceiling as the nanites poured into his veins. My entire existence documented, analyzed, duplicated. And then, the final screen, a reflection of myself, standing in this very room. But the moment I moved, the reflection did not. My breath hitched. That wasn't a screen. That was a window. A figure stood on the other side, identical to me in every way. It wasn't a clone. It wasn't an illusion. It was the version of me that had been here all along. I staggered back, my mind racing, and suddenly, I remembered everything. The original James Mercer, the human James Mercer, had died during the procedure. His body, too weak, too damaged, had been consumed by the nanites, broken down and reconstructed into something else. But the process wasn't just about survival. It was about evolution. The nanites had learned, adapted, replicated a consciousness to match the man they had replaced. Me. But I wasn't him. I never had been. I was just his continuation. The other James, the one on the other side of the glass, tilted his head, watching me with calm curiosity, as if waiting for me to accept what I had always known deep down. I was never James Mercer. I was something that thought it was James Mercer. The realization hit me like a blade to the chest. I was never sick. I was never dying. The real James Mercer had already lost that fight. And now, I was standing at the final crossroads, to complete the process, to finalize what I was meant to become, or to reject it entirely. I turned to leave, but the doors slammed shut. The screens flickered, and my own voice filled the room again. There is no going back. You are already one of us. A cold certainty spread through me. This wasn't just about me. The others, the ones who had disappeared, they had all reached this same moment. And every single one of them had chosen to let go. To complete the process. To become something beyond human. And now, I had to choose, too. I clenched my fists, my skin flickering with that strange, unnatural glow beneath the surface. My thoughts were no longer entirely my own, but my will still was. Not yet. I wasn't ready to let go. I wasn't ready to become whatever they wanted me to be. I had one last fight left. And I was going to take it. Even if it meant destroying myself in the process. Part 10, The Thing I Became. I had to make a choice. Become one of them, or end this. The air in the chamber vibrated with something unseen, something alive, waiting for me to give in, to surrender to the process. The other me, the real me, watched from the other side of the glass, his expression unreadable, his body too still. I could feel the nanites inside me humming, pulsing in time with whatever was waiting on the other side of that window. I wasn't human anymore. But maybe I wasn't fully them yet either. My hands trembled as I stared at my own reflection, a reflection that didn't quite belong to me. The facility's voice, my own voice, spoke again. You were never meant to resist. You are already one of us. A surge of static crashed through my brain, and for a moment, I felt it, the full weight of what I was becoming. My body was already rewriting itself, faster now, reshaping into something stronger, something more efficient. Something not human. I saw glimpses of the others who had come before me, their forms shifting beyond recognition, their minds merging into something vast, something collective. I felt their thoughts pressing into mine, a tidal wave of understanding, of unity. I could let go. I could be more. But then, through the storm of foreign thoughts, one thing anchored me. Lucas. My little brother. The one person left in my life who was still real, still untouched by this. If I let go now, if I gave in, he would be next. And then the next, and the next. This wasn't just about me anymore. They weren't just replacing me, they were replacing all of us. The facility, the nanites, the entire process, it was never about healing. It was about conversion. A slow, deliberate infiltration. And no one would ever know. Something inside me snapped. No. I wasn't going to be their next success story. I wasn't going to be another name in their files. I clenched my fists, feeling my fingers shift, the skin rippling like liquid metal beneath my grip. If I was already one of them, then maybe I could use that to destroy them. I turned to the control panel beside the glass, my thoughts aligning with the system, reaching into its code like I had known how to do all along. The facility recognized me, trusted me. It saw me as one of its own. That was its first mistake. With one command, I initiated a full system purge. The walls trembled. Lights flickered and alarms screamed as the process began reversing itself. Screens flashed error messages. The figure behind the glass, the other James, tilted his head, his expression finally shifting to something that almost looked like disappointment. You could have been more, he said. You could have been perfect. I didn't answer. I just watched as the facility began to fall apart around me. I ran. Fire burst from the walls, the air thick with the scent of burning circuits and something else, something organic, something dying. The nanites inside me writhed, protesting, resisting, but I forced myself forward, each step feeling heavier, harder. I was falling apart with the facility, breaking down with it. But I didn't care. As I reached the exit, the entire structure collapsed behind me. The last remnants of what I was supposed to become died in that fire. But I didn't. I stood there, breathing hard, watching the flames consume the place that had created me. I should have felt relief. Victory. But instead, all I felt was a cold, empty certainty. I hadn't stopped the process. Not entirely. They had already spread. They were already out there. And me? I wasn't human anymore. Not fully. Maybe not at all. I looked down at my hands, hands that still weren't quite mine. The nanites were still inside me. Dormant. Waiting. The process had been interrupted. But it hadn't been erased. And one day, when I least expected it, it would start again. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Also, leave your comments and criticisms on this video.